Lincoln Stauber, co-owner and co-CEO of the Fire Station Cannabis Company.
I'm Stosh Vosek, and I am the co-owner and co-CEO of the Fire Station.
My journey in cannabis started back in 2012 when I was still in high school. I had about $2,000. I was flipping cars at the time for extra cash, and I didn't know what to do with it. And so I invested it in Medical Marijuana Inc., which at the time had no business in cannabis, but it was a publicly traded pink sheet stock. And essentially, I made a little bit of money from that, and that was what really started my wheels turning on cannabis becoming legal in the United States. When I got into college, it was just everything I could do prepping for the future, and it wasn't just cannabis, it was other businesses as well, flipping fireworks, running an online retail store, starting a clip company or a side manufacturing business, and also being a cannabis caregiver. So I took an internship with a local attorney to learn more about the cannabis laws and continued actually growing cannabis at the time. And that was originally, everything that I was doing. And, I think our visions were aligned. I ended up, I brought my fiance to my house, or my current fiance. She was my girlfriend at the time, to show her. And she laughed and kind of smiled and said, my brother grows just as much cannabis as you do. And that was kind of what started the connection between Stosh, myself, and our other partner, Ryan, because they owned the hydroponic store together. And from that point, it seemed pretty organic.
What got me started in cannabis, I would say in college I was definitely a heavy user, and there was a lot of fast money being made in the space, and it was definitely intriguing, and it attracted me to that scene. I mean, I grew up in cannabis. It's been a family business for as long as I can remember. And so it was just like the natural progression, moving from just being a cannabis user to getting into the cannabis space and starting my first business back in 2012 when I was still in college. I started Northern Hydroponics, and that's what really opened the door for me in the cannabis space. And then it's been almost 11 years since then. So Ryan and I were business partners at Northern Hydroponics, and we were like, okay, great, we want to get into retail. And Kelsey, I believe, was dating Logan at the time, and so Ryan and I were like, hey, this is something we want to get into. And then I think we had a lunch or something with Logan, and we were like, hey, do you want to get on board? Let's do this. And he's like, yeah, this is great. And that was the beginning of our journey. And then from there, we decided, we started pitching names. I think I still have the notebook with about 50 different names in it of all the different names we were going to call it, and eventually we settled on the Fire Station.
That one had been available. It had been for sale for years, and the bank valued the actual building at $0. So it was attainable for us. We looked at it and saw what we could do with it. Everybody thought we were crazy.
And we were.
We were. Yeah, crazy to think that we could do it. So there were so many challenges with it. There wasn't water to the property. When we originally approached the township, they wanted us to rip up the entire highway to bring a water main to it. It just wasn't feasible. It was going to be over $200,000 at that time to do it. We didn't have the cash to do that, so we kept exploring other options. And that's why I applaud the township. Gary Wammer, the township supervisor, came to us and he said, hey, I'll work out a deal with you guys. We'll run a PVC line to your building. There's no promises on if it'll last, if it'll hold, but it's a temporary solution. And ultimately, that's what we ended up going with to bring water, because it's all rock there, so you can't actually hit water for a well. That was the first challenge. That building had hay in the walls. I mean, it was that old. It was built from scrap materials from the old mine out in Negaunee. So the actual trusses of the building are made with railroad ties. And so every wall was warped. There wasn't real 2x4s. I mean, it was ugly. It took a lot of TLC.
Yeah, and then looking back on the building, for what we opened with, we were so underprepared for what was to come. And eventually we had to grow and we had to scale. I mean, I think we had occupancy of 12 people in the building, and once recreational hit prior to our expansion there, I think we had 44 or 48 employees employed with the fire station. Obviously, not everybody's working 7 days a week, but you can imagine the constraints of the building and limitations. You know, we had delivery drivers that were told to stay in the vehicles during their shift and wait till the delivery because the occupancy would be overloaded. They could come in to use the restroom or go on break, and security personnel had to stay outside in the lot to ensure that, you know, we weren't over capacity in the building. And so we operated out of 854 square feet, and we were seeing over 1,000 customers a day. And so it was a real struggle to do that out of that tiny building. I was going to say, like, on top of the building in Negaunee, you know, it's built on a hill, and like the issues that come with a 100-year-old building that's worth nothing, like the water issues and the amount of like drainage and site work that we had to do to ensure that we were keeping everything safe and compliant, and then dealing with customers coming in and like lining up around the door at 8 a.m. and we'd be there until 1 a.m. trying to count like actual cash, which was a nightmare. And then we'd have to be back by 7 a.m. to get the store ready to open. So it was a lot of really long days.
Yeah, I remember, one of the previous landowners, and I think it was like 20 or 30 years prior, it was like their niece or nephew came in to shop at the store, and he looked at me and he said, what did you guys do with the pool in the basement? And I said, what do you mean pool in the basement? He's like, oh, there's like 5 feet of water down there every spring. And at the time we had no idea. And so we were just like, oh boy. And sure enough, springtime came around, and the walls and the floor, I mean, water was coming in from every direction. While we're servicing all of these customers, we had our friend Joey Enright come in and bring an excavator and just get in there and start moving some dirt and putting in drain tile. That was crazy. And then the other thing, not to mention, was the cash. You know, the minute we opened, banks weren't willing to work with us. We didn't have safe access to banking at the time, and so the cash management was a huge deal. I mean, paying for purchases, cash on delivery. Every time a van would show up, we would pay in cash. And there was specifically a time where we had to make our tax payment, and the nearest place was in Escanaba to actually make the payment. So we're like, well, how are we going to move this much money? You know, and I ended up reaching out to the sheriff's department and just saying, hey, listen, you know, we don't feel comfortable moving this kind of cash to pay our taxes. Will you help us? And sure enough, they were you know, confident, willing, and able to step in, and they essentially sent 2 officers in an unmarked car who tailed us all the way there and escorted us into the building to pay our taxes. COVID was a huge one for us. We didn't know what COVID was going to mean. We thought that we were going to go under. You know, we thought that for sure the governor was going to shut down all cannabis stores across the state, and to our luck, it didn't play out that way. They deemed us essential, and it was like pouring gasoline on the fire. You know, it was, people were staying at home. They wanted something to do, something to put them in a different headspace, and we saw a lot of revenue jump, and that was part of the growth, was just adapting to meet the needs of COVID. You know, we couldn't have customers in our buildings. We switched to a curbside-only model. You know, everything from changing how our computer systems operated to how we dealt with customers, you know, was essentially changed overnight.
Yeah, I mean, if we could pull all the footage from all the things that happened in that lot during the first year, I mean, the amount of like car accidents and vehicles breaking down, and us like having to push cars that are overheated, that are leaking antifreeze all over the parking lot. Like, we were out there doing that. We were giving interviews to hire staff as quickly as we possibly could on the porch while there's a 2-hour wait in the parking lot. And we were just like, okay, great, you're hired. Put a vest on, let's go.
We need help, and we need it now.
We need help, and we need it now. So that was definitely one of the biggest struggles, like I would say, or like interesting things that were happening in the building.
And a lot of those people ended up becoming some of our best employees. I mean, the first people that we hired, a lot of them are still with us today, and they've grown dramatically with us as the company has scaled. So I think that there's multiple avenues we could have gone. We could have went for a vertically integrated model and started focusing on a grow. Ultimately, we saw the value in retail. You know, the licenses are harder to come by. Municipalities restrict the number of stores you can have in communities, either by zoning, by competitive process, or they just simply opt out. So for us at the time, it made sense. You know, Marquette, also being in Negaunee, it wasn't as ideal anymore. At the time, Marquette hadn't opted in for cannabis, so once they did, we were going to lose a lot of our customers to the Marquette location. So it just made sense. We knew we had to be there.
I mean, during Marquette's planning process, I spent several hours with the planning commission trying to figure out what's going to work best for the city and zoning to put these places in appropriate spots. And lucky for us, a couple of our good friends owned the building that the fire station's currently in now, and so it was an opportunity for us to be able to move into that building and put our store that met the zoning requirements and be in a desirable location, given the limitations of the city of Marquette. Now, while it may not be the best location for a cannabis dispensary in the city, it's the best location for a cannabis dispensary in the city based on what the zoning says. So we were really lucky to be able to find that and be able to be in a position to move forward with that.
It's as close to downtown as you can get. The experience that we were going for was buying cannabis from your friends. We looked at these other retail chains that had opened up and they had armed security guards. It looked like a white wall doctor's office, and that wasn't the feel and the experience that we were trying to go for. And in order for it to feel like, hey, you're having this experience where we're a resource for information, it's like buying cannabis from your friends, we had to foster that environment. So at the time, the employees, we really pushed that, put the customer first, go above and beyond, make this a true experience for them, because it was cannabis becoming legal for the first time. And if a customer had a bad experience, well, then they would never come back to our store. And so it was a crucial thing for us to really put emphasis on the fact that customers cannot have a bad experience at our stores.